My name is Helen, I'm 68 years old. And my own son tried to poison me for an inheritance I never planned on giving him. Before I tell you how a single bottle of wine led to a bitter divorce and a courtroom battle that tore our family apart, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all started on my 68th birthday. The house was quiet, the way it always is since my husband, Richard, passed away. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea when the doorbell rang. On the porch was a long, elegant box. There was no card, no sender's name, just a few words scrawled on a sticky note. Happy birthday. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that handwriting. It was messy, the B was always too big. It was my son Mark's. I hadn't seen or heard from him in nearly 3 years, not since the fight. The one where he demanded I sell the house, his father's house, to fund some risky tech startup. He'd called me a fool for holding on to the past, for not seeing the opportunity. I had called him disrespectful to his father's memory. The silence that followed that argument was cold and absolute. And now this. Peace offering, maybe? I brought the box inside. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Nestled in a bed of satin was a bottle of expensive-looking red wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. The label was thick and embossed with gold foil. It was the kind of bottle you save for a special occasion. A small bitter smile touched my lips. The irony was almost cruel. Mark knew I couldn't drink. 3 years ago, right after our fight, the stress had triggered my heart condition. Atrial fibrillation, the doctor called it. I was put on blood thinners for the rest of my life, and the first thing the cardiologist told me was, Helen, not another drop of alcohol. It's not worth the risk. Mark had been there, standing in the corner of that sterile hospital room, staring at his phone while the doctor laid out my new reality. He knew. So what was this? A thoughtless gift? Or something else? I pushed the darker thought away. Maybe he just forgot. People change. Maybe he was finally trying to mend the bridges he'd burned. The bottle sat on my counter all afternoon, a silent, gleaming accusation. I couldn't drink it, and letting it gather dust felt wrong. Then I thought of David Miller. David lived 2 doors down. He was a widower like me and the kindest man you could ever meet. Just last week, he'd spent his entire Saturday fixing the shingles on my roof that had come loose in a storm, and he'd refused to take a dime for it. He was also Jessica's father, my daughter-in-law, a good man who deserved something nice. The thought settled in my chest, warm and right. This beautiful bottle shouldn't go to waste. It should be enjoyed. I walked over, picked it up, and carried it down the street to David's house. He was in his garden, wrestling with a stubborn weed. When he saw the bottle, his eyes lit up. Helen, what's this? This looks serious. A birthday gift, I said, handing it to him. From Mark, actually. But you know I can't drink, and I'd rather it go to someone who will appreciate it. He took it, his rough gardener's hands gentle on the glass. Well, I'll be. That's mighty generous of you, Helen. I'll open it with dinner tonight and toast to your health. His smile was genuine, and for the first time all day, the knot in my stomach loosened. I had done the right thing. The next morning, I was washing my breakfast dishes when the phone rang. It was Mark. My heart gave a little flutter of hope. Maybe this was the real reconciliation. Hi, Mom, he said, his voice strangely flat. Mark, it's good to hear from you. Thank you for the wine, it was beautiful. There was a pause. So you got it, he said. How was it? Did you try it yet? Something in his tone, an edge of anticipation, made the hairs on my arm stand up. Oh, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I gave it to your father-in-law, David. You know I can't drink. He was thrilled, said he loved it. The silence on the other end of the line was instantaneous and heavy. It wasn't a thoughtful pause, it was a void. I could hear nothing, not even his breathing. Mark? I asked, a cold dread beginning to seep into my bones. Then his voice came back, no longer flat but sharp, high-pitched, and laced with a terrifying blend of panic and fury. He screamed into the phone. The sound so raw it felt like a physical blow. You did what? I recoiled, pulling the phone away from my ear. Mark, what's wrong? It's just a bottle of wine. No, 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 he muttered, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. He wasn't talking to me anymore. He was talking to himself. This wasn't supposed to happen. He hung up. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of his violent reaction. What wasn't supposed to happen? What was so special about that bottle? The dread was a physical weight now, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Just as I placed the phone back in its cradle, it rang again. My hand flew to my heart, thinking it was Mark calling back to explain. But the caller ID showed a different name. Jessica Miller. My daughter-in-law. I took a shaky breath and answered. Hello, Jessica? All I could hear on the other end was sobbing. Hysterical, gut-wrenching sobs. Jessica, honey, what is it? What's happened? Her voice finally broke through the tears, choked and barely audible. It's Dad, she cried. Back Helen, it's my dad. He collapsed. We're at the hospital. They think he's been poisoned. The world went silent. All I could hear was the frantic, useless buzzing of the dial tone and the frantic, useless thumping of my own heart against my ribs. Poisoned. The word wasn't just a word. It was a sentence, a judgment that echoed in the sudden, suffocating quiet of my kitchen. It felt like a venomous snake had uncoiled in the middle of my sunlit room. David. Kind, gentle David, a man who had spent his Saturday fixing my roof out of sheer neighborly kindness, was now fighting for his life in a hospital bed. And it was because of a gift. A gift I had passed along. A gift from my son. I don't remember grabbing my keys or putting on my shoes. The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and street signs that meant nothing to me. My mind was a frantic carousel of images. Mark's angry face during our last fight, his messy handwriting on the note, the cold, heavy bottle in my hands, and David's warm, grateful smile. The questions pounded in my head with the force of a migraine. Why? Why would he do this? Was it a mistake? It couldn't be. Not with that scream. That wasn't the sound of surprise. It was the sound of a plan gone horribly, terribly wrong. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and a unique kind of dread that clings to the very air. I found Jessica in the ICU waiting room, her face pale and streaked with mascara. The moment she saw me, she collapsed into my arms, her body trembling with sobs. Oh, Helen, she cried, her voice muffled against my shoulder. They don't know what it is. His heart is, it's a mess. They keep using the word toxins. 1 minute his pulse is racing, the next it's dangerously slow. They're running every test they can think of. I held her, offering useless words of comfort like he's strong, and they'll figure it out, while my own guilt was a physical sickness rising in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the wine, not yet. How could I? How could I look this devastated woman in the eye and say, I think my son did this to your father? It felt like a confession to a crime I didn't even understand. When I finally got home hours later, the house felt wrong. Violated. The cheerful yellow of my kitchen walls seemed to mock me. I walked through the rooms on autopilot, every object a reminder of a life that had felt safe just 24 hours ago. I had to do something, anything, to keep from shattering into a million pieces. I decided to take out the trash, a mundane chore in the face of madness. As I lifted the heavy plastic bag from its bin, something small and light, something that had been caught behind the liner, clattered onto the linoleum floor. It rolled under the edge of the counter. I knelt down, my old knees groaning in protest, and reached for it. It was a small, empty plastic vial, the kind prescription pills come in. There was no label, no markings at all. I held it up to the light filtering through the window. The inside was coated with a faint, almost invisible dusting of fine white powder. I had never seen it before in my life. I don't take any medication that comes in a vial like this. Where in God's name did it come from? I stood up, my mind a whirlwind. And then a memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharp and brutally clear. Before I'd taken the wine to David, I had uncorked it in my kitchen. Just for a moment, driven by a foolish pang of nostalgia, I'd wanted to smell it, to remember the rich, dark scent of Cabernet that my husband and I used to enjoy on special evenings. I had poured a tiny amount into a glass, maybe a spoonful, swirled it, watching the deep red liquid cling to the sides. Then the doctor's warning had echoed in my head, and I'd poured it straight down the sink. But I hadn't rinsed the bottle. There was still a small amount of wine left at the very bottom. I'd recorked it and put it in the back of the fridge, meaning to rinse it out later. I'd completely forgotten. I still had a sample. My hands were shaking now, but with purpose. I knew who to call. Dr. Arthur Peters, a dear friend since Richard was alive, had been the head pharmacist at the county hospital for 40 years before he retired. He was brilliant, with a mind like a steel trap. "Arthur," I said, my voice trembling when he answered. "I need your help. It's an emergency." I explained everything, the wine, Mark's terrifying reaction, David in the hospital, the strange vial I just found. He didn't question me, didn't tell me I was overreacting. He just said, "Bring it all over, Helen. Now, put the vial in a plastic baggie and don't touch it again with your bare hands." But that night sleep was a stranger. I lay in bed staring into the darkness, my mind replaying Mark's scream over and over. Around 2 a.m., I was startled by a noise from the backyard. A sharp scraping sound. I crept to the window that overlooked my little garden shed. A dark figure was hunched by the window of the shed, working at the latch with something small and metallic. My blood ran cold. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand to call 911. But by the time I looked back, the figure was gone, vanished into the shadows. The next morning, my heart pounding, I went outside to inspect the shed. The latch on the window had been jimmied. The wood around it splintered. Nothing was stolen. There was nothing in there but old gardening tools and pots. But the message was clear. Someone had been there. Someone was looking for something. I walked back into the kitchen, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. My eyes darted to the counter where I'd left the vial and the wine bottle in a paper bag, ready to take to Arthur. The vial, it was gone. The bag was still there, the bottle of wine was still inside, but the small plastic vial had vanished. Someone had been inside my house. Just then the phone rang shrill in the silent house. It was Arthur. His voice was grim, stripped of its usual warmth. "Helen," he said, and the way he said my name told me everything. "Are you sitting down? Just tell me, Arthur." He took a deep breath. I ran the test twice. I couldn't believe it the first time. "Helen, the wine is laced with a concentrated extract of digitalis. It's derived from the foxglove plant. It's a powerful heart medication, but in the wrong dose, it's a deadly, untraceable poison. In your condition, with your atrial fibrillation and the blood thinners, a single glass would have been fatal. It would have looked like a massive, spontaneous heart attack." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This wasn't an accident, Helen. The dosage is too precise. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. I didn't bend to pick it up. I just stared at the empty space on my counter where the vial had been. The figure in the dark, the jimmied lock, the missing vial. It all clicked into place with horrifying, absolute certainty. My son hadn't just given me a thoughtless gift. He had given me a death sentence. And when his plan failed, he had come back to erase the evidence. For a long time, I just sat at my kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing in on me like a physical weight. The cheerful morning sun spilling across my floor felt like a cruel joke. My son, my only child, had tried to kill me. The thought wasn't an abstraction anymore. It was a cold, hard fact, supported by science and a missing piece of evidence. The shock was a block of ice in my chest, but slowly something else began to burn underneath it. A cold, hard anger. He wasn't going to get away with this. He wasn't going to turn me into a statistic, another sad story on the local news. I picked up the phone, my hand surprisingly steady. I didn't call the police, not yet. I needed something more. I needed to see his face when he lied. I found my old purse, the one with the deep inside pocket, and slipped my phone inside. I opened the voice recording app and pressed the red button. The timer started silently counting up. Mark lived in a newer subdivision across town. A place with identical houses and lawns so perfect they looked like plastic. It was a world away from the rambling old farmhouse where he'd grown up. As I pulled up, I saw his expensive new SUV in the driveway, the one he'd bragged about last Christmas, the only time he'd bothered to call in 3 years. A monument to the life he was so desperate to fund. He opened the door and his face was a masterpiece of feigned concern. "Mom, what are you doing here? I was just about to call you. I heard about David. It's just awful. Is he okay?" The performance was flawless. The worried son, the concerned son-in-law. It made my stomach churn with a mixture of grief and disgust. "Let me in, Mark. I said, my voice as flat and hard as a slab of granite. I walked past him into the sterile show-home living room. Everything was gray and beige with no personal touches, no family photos on the walls. It was a house, not a home. It felt as cold and empty as my son's heart. I know what was in the wine, I said, turning to face him, my purse clutched in my hand. He blinked, a flicker of something, not surprise but calculation in his eyes. What are you talking about? It must have been a bad bottle. Contaminated at the vineyard or something. We should sue them. Stop it, I said, my voice low but sharp, cutting through his pathetic charade. Just stop it, Mark. It wasn't a bad bottle. It was poison. Digitalis. A pharmacist friend of mine tested it. He said it was enough to stop my heart. For a fraction of a second I saw it. Pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes. His mask slipped. He recovered instantly, forcing a shocked, disbelieving laugh. Poison? Mom, are you serious? You've been under a lot of stress lately. Since Dad's passing, you haven't been yourself. Maybe you're just getting things mixed up. You're getting older, and sometimes memory. He was gaslighting me. Standing there, calmly suggesting I was senile, after he had tried to murder me. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it stole my breath. I found the vial you used to put it in, Mark, I said, my eyes locked on his, watching his face for the slightest crack. The little plastic one you left behind in my trash. But it's gone now, isn't it? It disappeared from my kitchen counter this morning. Right after someone broke into my shed. His face went chalk white. He couldn't hide it this time. The mention of the shed, the specific detail, had hit its mark. He knew he'd been caught in a lie. I have no idea what you're talking about, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. I had what I needed. His panic, his stammering denial, it was all being captured by the microphone in my purse. I turned and walked toward the door without another word. There was nothing left to say. Mom, wait, he called after me. His voice no longer smooth, but laced with a raw desperation. Don't do this. You'll ruin everything. My career, my family, we can talk about the inheritance, we can work something out. I know the college fund for the kids is a concern. Inheritance. College fund. There it was. The ugly, greedy heart of it all. He was trying to bribe me, to bargain for his freedom using the very thing he tried to kill me for. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, pulling the door shut behind me. My next stop was the police station. I sat across from a man named Detective Evans, a seasoned officer with tired eyes that seemed to have seen the worst of humanity. I told him everything from the beginning. I played the recording from my phone. He listened intently, his expression shifting from professional skepticism to grim focus. When the recording ended with Mark's desperate plea about the inheritance, he let out a slow breath. He took the wine bottle, now sealed in an evidence bag, and assured me they would launch a full investigation immediately. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I drove home feeling emotionally scoured but resolute. The worst was over, I thought. I had faced him, I had concrete evidence, I had gone to the police. Now the system would do its job. How naive I was. That evening the phone rang. It was Jessica, my daughter-in-law. I picked up, expecting to hear an update on David, maybe even a tearful apology now that she knew the truth. Helen, she said, and her voice was devoid of any warmth. It was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Jessica, how is your father? He's stable, she said curtly. That's not why I'm calling. Mark told me you went to the police. He told me the insane paranoid story you've cooked up in your head. I was stunned into silence. Cooked up? Jessica, he tried to kill me. He poisoned your father by mistake. I have a recording of him practically confessing. She let out a short, ugly laugh that made my skin crawl. Oh, please. A recording you probably manipulated. You've been bitter ever since Mark tried to get you to sell that useless old house so he could build a future for his family. A future you didn't care about. You're just trying to ruin him because he's more successful than you ever gave him credit for. I can't believe you would stoop this low, trying to get your own son arrested with some fantasy about a poisoned bottle of wine. You should be ashamed of yourself. The line went dead. I stood there, the receiver pressed to my ear, listening to the crushing silence. The betrayal was so profound, so complete. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. It wasn't just my son. It was both of them. They were a team. And in that moment I realized the awful truth. This wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. This was a war for my own sanity, my own reputation, against the two people who should have been my family. And I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The days that followed Jessica's venomous phone call were a special kind of hell. The small flicker of hope I'd felt after leaving the police station was extinguished, replaced by a gnawing, ever-present anxiety. They were going to fight this. They were going to lie, cheat, and do whatever it took to discredit me. They were going to paint me as a vindictive, senile old woman. And the chilling part was they had a head start. The thought made my skin crawl. This was exactly what Mark had tried to do when I confronted him. He was planting the seeds of my supposed insanity, and his wife was now his loyal gardener. I tried to keep busy, to maintain a semblance of normalcy. I tidied the garden until there wasn't a single weed left. I organized my late husband's bookshelf, the scent of old paper and leather a small comfort. I did anything to keep my hands moving and my mind from spiraling into the dark abyss of what-ifs. But every time the phone rang I jumped, my heart lurching into my throat. Every car that slowed down on my street sent a jolt of pure fear through me. The safety of my own home had been stolen. 2 days after I spoke to Jessica it happened. The knock on the door was firm, official sounding. My first thought was that it was Detective Evans with an update. I opened it to find a pleasant-looking woman in her 40s, dressed in a sensible pantsuit and holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Helen Richards?" she asked, a professional but wary smile on her face. "Yes. My name is Susan Albright. I'm with the County Adult Protective Services. May I come in for a moment? We've received a report that we're required to follow up on." Adult Protective Services. The words hit me like a physical slap. My blood ran cold. I knew with a sickening certainty who was behind this. This was their next move. This was the masterstroke. If he couldn't poison me, he would have me declared incompetent. He would strip me of my credibility, my home, my freedom, and have it all look like an act of mercy. I stepped back and let her in, my mind racing. I had to stay calm. I had to be lucid. Any sign of distress, any hint of the terror I was feeling, would be twisted and used against me. Ms. Albright sat on my sofa, her eyes subtly scanning the neat living room, taking in the framed photos, the tidy bookshelves. "Mrs. Richards," she began, her tone gentle but firm, "we received an anonymous call expressing concern for your well-being. The caller stated that you have been exhibiting signs of confusion, memory loss, and paranoia. They said you are making rather serious and bizarre accusations against family members. They were worried you might be a danger to yourself." Humiliation washed over me, hot and sharp. It was a violation deeper than the break-in. I had to sit there in my own home, a place filled with a lifetime of memories, and defend my own mind to a stranger because my son was a monster. I took a deep breath, clasping my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. I would not let him win. I would not let them see me crumble. I looked Ms. Albright directly in the eye and in the calmest, most measured voice I could manage, I told her everything. I started from the beginning. I told her about the wine, about David in the hospital, about my son's scream on the phone. I told her about the missing vial and the break-in at my shed. I told her about my visit to the police, the evidence I provided, and the cruel, dismissive phone call I'd received from my daughter-in-law. I laid out the facts one by one, like placing stones in a row, building a foundation of truth. She listened without interruption, her pen occasionally scratching on her notepad. She asked questions, sharp, intelligent questions that showed she was truly listening. She asked about my health, my finances, my relationship with my son before the fight over the house sale, and the college fund he demanded. She wanted to know if I had a support system, friends I could rely on. I answered everything honestly. When she asked about my finances, I explained that my husband, Richard, had been a prudent man. The house was paid off and I had a healthy retirement fund and some investments from his life insurance. I didn't need to sell. Mark's business opportunity had involved me liquidating nearly everything to give him a sum of money I simply didn't feel comfortable with, especially after he refused to provide a concrete business plan. After nearly an hour, she closed her notebook. She looked at me for a long moment, and her professional mask seemed to slip, revealing a flicker of genuine empathy. "Mrs. Richards," she said, and her expression had softened considerably. "I visit a lot of homes. I talk to a lot of people. Your home is well kept, and you are one of the most lucid and articulate individuals I have spoken with this month." She paused, and her next words were a balm to my raw nerves. "The call we received has all the hallmarks of what we call retaliatory reporting. It's a tactic sometimes used in cases of elder financial abuse or family disputes to discredit the victim and muddy the waters for law enforcement." Tears of sheer, overwhelming relief pricked my eyes. She believed me. A complete stranger had listened to my story and believed me. "My official report will state that you are competent, not in any danger, and that the initial report appears to be unfounded and possibly malicious," she said as she stood to leave. "I would, however, strongly advise you to continue cooperating with Detective Evans. What your son is doing, it's a form of psychological abuse." After she left, I sank into my armchair, the strength draining out of me. I had been vindicated, but I felt filthy, as if I had been forced to roll in mud. My own son had tried to have me declared mentally unfit, to paint me as a crazy old woman, all to save his own skin. It was a new level of cruelty I couldn't have imagined. I sat there for a long time, just staring out the window at the setting sun. The beautiful orange and pink hues felt out of place in my gray world. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come with a violent act. They come with a quiet knock on the door and a clipboard, an attack designed to dismantle you piece by piece, to make you question your own reality. I knew this was far from over. This was a war, and he had just shown me how dirty he was willing to play. But as the sun disappeared below the horizon, my fear started to curdle back into that cold, hard anger. He thought he could break me. He thought he could humiliate me into silence. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Detective Evans. "Helen, I'm glad I reached you," he said, his voice urgent. "The preliminary lab report on the wine came back. It's exactly what your friend said. A significant concentration of digitalis. We also started looking into Mark's finances, just a hunch after what you told me about the house. You were right to be concerned. He's not just in debt, Helen. He's drowning in it. It looks like he took out some very high-risk, uninsured loans for that startup of his, and they're about to come due. He's desperate." Another piece of the puzzle slid into place, dark and ugly. It wasn't just about resentment or a family squabble. It was about cold hard cash. My life, my home, my inheritance. It was all just a solution to his financial problems. The cold-blooded calculation of it all took my breath away. He wasn't just a monster. He was a predator, and I was his prey. The revelation about Mark's catastrophic debt changed everything. It stripped away any lingering foolish hope that this was some terrible heat-of-the-moment misunderstanding. This was cold, calculated, and driven by a desperate greed that I had never imagined my son was capable of. Detective Evans's words echoed in my head. He's desperate. Desperate people don't just give up when their first plan fails. They get more dangerous. My first act the next morning was to call a locksmith. A kind, quiet man with sawdust in his graying hair came and replaced every lock in my house with heavy-duty, pick-proof deadbolts. I had new, stronger hasps put on the shed and the old basement door. As he worked, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I was turning my home, my sanctuary of 40 years, into a fortress. It was a necessary evil, but it felt like a defeat. My final purchase was a simple, doorbell-style security camera. The locksmith installed it for me, pointing it at my front porch and the street beyond. It had a motion detector that would alert my phone. Watching him install it, I felt a chill. I was now a woman who needed a camera to feel safe from her own child. The day after the locks were changed, the psychological warfare began. The first text message came from an unknown number, a sterile string of digits that felt menacing in its anonymity. "You're making a huge mistake. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Stop this now." I felt a jolt of pure fear, but I remembered Detective Evans's instructions. I took a screenshot, my fingers trembling slightly, and immediately forwarded it to him. His reply was swift and professional. Received. Do not engage. Do not reply. Document everything. The texts became more frequent and more personal over the next few days. A steady drip of poison into my life. They can't protect you forever. A camera won't stop someone who really wants to get in. Think about your reputation. Think about what people in town will say when this all comes out. They'll think you're a crazy, bitter old woman. This is your last chance to drop the charges. Don't make me do something we'll both regret. Each message was a small, sharp jab, designed to wear me down, to isolate me, to make me feel constantly under threat. And it was working. I started jumping at every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside my window. I stopped answering my phone unless I recognized the number, letting all other calls go to the answering machine. I felt like a prisoner in my own fortified home, held captive by a man who was supposed to love and protect me. Meanwhile, Detective Evans and his team were digging deeper, unraveling the web of deceit Mark had woven. He called me a few days later, his voice grim with what he'd found. "Helen, we've been tracking Mark's recent computer activity. We got a warrant for his work laptop. It seems he's been doing a lot of research." "What kind of research?" I asked, my stomach tightening into a cold, hard knot. "He's been searching for things like digitalis dosage fatal human, how to obscure taste of poison in red wine, and, Helen, this is the part that's going to be hard to hear. He's also been looking up the property value of your home on Zillow repeatedly, almost daily for the past month. And he accessed several legal websites, reading articles about Ohio inheritance law. Specifically, he was focused on what happens when a parent dies intestate, without a will." I had to sit down on the edge of my bed. My legs suddenly felt weak. He had been planning this, methodically, researching my murder like it was a school project, a business problem to be solved. The casual cruelty of it, the sheer emotional detachment, was what chilled me to the bone. He wasn't lashing out in a moment of anger. He had sat at a computer day after day and coolly, calmly plotted my death, so he could get his hands on my house and my money. The fight about the college fund wasn't the trigger. It was just part of his long-term financial strategy. "There's more," Detective Evans said, his voice heavy. "We found a series of deleted emails between him and a cousin of Jessica's, a man named Leo. They're talking about a special landscaping project. The cousin works for a large botanical garden in the next state. We think he may have been Mark's source for the foxglove plants. It was a conspiracy. It wasn't just Mark. They were all in on it, or at least covering for each other." Jessica's cold, accusatory phone call suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. She wasn't just defending her husband out of misguided loyalty. She might have been protecting her own family, trying to shut down an investigation that could lead back to her cousin. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, watching the little red light on the new security camera blink, a solitary, watchful eye in the darkness. I felt a wave of profound, soul-crushing sadness wash over me. I wasn't just grieving the son I thought I had. I was grieving the entire life I thought I had. The family dinners I had hoped for. The future grandchildren I had longed to spoil. All of it was a lie. A fantasy I had clung to while my own child was methodically plotting my demise. Around midnight, a notification pinged on my phone. The security camera had detected motion. My heart leaped into my throat. I pulled up the live feed, my hand shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone steady. A dark, nondescript sedan was parked across the street, its lights off. It was too dark to see the make or model or who was inside. It just sat there, a dark, menacing shape in the quiet suburban night. It stayed for 10, maybe 15 minutes, unmoving. Felt like an eternity. I felt like an insect pinned under a microscope. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, its headlights flashed on once, a quick, deliberate blink. It made a slow U-turn and drove away into the night. Could have been a coincidence. A lost driver. A teenager meeting a friend. But I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that it wasn't. It was him. Or someone he had sent. He was watching me. He was letting me know that the new locks and the cameras didn't matter. He could still get to me. He wanted me to live in constant, gut-wrenching fear. I didn't go back to bed. I sat in that armchair until the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, watching the empty street. The fear was still there, a cold companion in the dark. But something else was growing alongside it. A stubborn, defiant anger. He wanted me to be afraid. He wanted me to back down, to drop the charges, to crawl into a hole and disappear. Fine. Let him watch. Let him send his pathetic, anonymous threats. I wasn't going anywhere. This was my home. My life. And I was going to fight for it with everything I had left. The car parked across the street, the silent, watching predator in the night, was the last straw for Detective Evans. The combination of the lab-confirmed poison, Mark's catastrophic financial desperation, his chillingly specific search history, and now this campaign of blatant intimidation was more than enough. The net was closing. "We're going to the judge first thing in the morning, Helen," he told me on the phone, his voice hard with resolve. "We have more than enough probable cause for a search warrant. A comprehensive one. We're going to search his house, his cars, that workshop in his backyard, and any storage units he has rented. We're not leaving a single stone unturned." A wave of nervous, electric energy surged through me. This was it. This was the moment of truth. Whatever dark secrets Mark was hiding, whatever proof of his monstrous plans existed, were about to be dragged kicking and screaming into the light. "When?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Tomorrow afternoon. I don't want to give him any more time to get rid of anything. I need you to do something for me, Helen, and I need you to promise me you'll do it. Stay home. Lock your doors. Do not answer your phone unless it's me or your lawyer. He's going to be cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous. I don't know what he'll do." The hours that followed were some of the longest of my life. I paced my living room, the familiar pattern of the rug worn into my memory. I couldn't sit still. Every creak of the old house's floorboards sounded like footsteps. I kept glancing at my phone, willing it to ring with news, yet dreading what that news might be. I imagined the scene at Mark's house. The quiet dread of the unmarked police cars pulling up, the sharp, official knock on the door, the shock and feigned outrage on Jessica's face, and then the methodical, dispassionate process of officers going through their perfect, sterile home, searching for evidence of a plot to murder his own mother. Finally, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "County Police Department." I snatched it up. "Hello. We've got it, Helen," Detective Evans said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. "We found it all. It's worse than we thought." "Found what?" I breathed, sinking into the nearest chair. In the back of his workshop, hidden inside a large locked toolbox under a pile of old tarps, we found a small-scale, disturbingly sophisticated lab setup. Glass beakers, precise digital scales, droppers, filtration paper, the works. And there were books. Several thick textbooks on herbal toxicology and organic chemistry. One was open on his workbench, dog-eared to a chapter on cardiac glycosides, the active poison in digitalis. I closed my eyes, picturing it. My son, the failed tech entrepreneur, playing chemist in his garage, brewing a potion to kill his mother. "But that's not the worst of it," Detective Evans continued, his voice dropping, becoming more serious. "We found a notebook. A little black moleskine journal, tucked inside one of the toxicology books. It's a logbook, Helen. A detailed journal of his experiments." Experiments. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. He has entries dating back nearly a year. He details the process of extracting the poison from the foxglove plants he got from Jessica's cousin. He writes about testing different concentrations, different methods of masking the taste. There are notes, Helen, actual notes like, batch number 3 too bitter, needs more sugar or a high tannin wine to mask, and batch number 5, potency seems to fade after 48 hours in solution. Must be administered fresh. My stomach roiled. I felt physically sick. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a science project. A research and development phase for my murder. "And then there are the targets," Detective Evans said, and I could hear the genuine disgust in his voice. "He doesn't use names. He uses initials. There are several entries for them. We're certain that's David Miller. He details giving him small, non-lethal doses over the past few months, disguised in coffee he'd bring over, or a shared beer when they watched a game. He calls it field testing the delivery system and priming the subject's cardiac response. My God. David's recent complaints about feeling unusually tired, about occasional heart palpitations that the doctors couldn't explain. It wasn't just age. Mark had been slowly, methodically poisoning his own father-in-law for months, using him as a human guinea pig. "And then," Detective Evans said, his voice heavy with the weight of his next words, "there's an entry for you, Helen. It's dated the day before your birthday. It's the last entry in the book. It has your initials, HR. And next to them he wrote a full sentence. Final dose prepared. Batch number 7 maximum potency. For the big inheritance payout. No more half measures. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. The words hung in the air, clinical, monstrous, and utterly devoid of humanity. The big inheritance payout. That's all I was to him. Piggy bank he needed to break open. The final obstacle to his financial freedom. We arrested him on sight, Detective Evans said, pulling me back from the abyss. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. He just stood there with this smirk on his face as we put the cuffs on him. Just as we were leading him out, Jessica arrived. She saw the cuffs, saw the evidence bags, and she just started screaming. Not at us, but at him. Screaming that he was a monster, that he had ruined their lives, that he had lied to her about everything. He was in custody. He was arrested. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. It was real. The threat was neutralized. He couldn't hurt me anymore. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into my husband's old study, a room I mostly kept closed because the memories were too sharp, and pulled a photo album from the shelf. I turned the pages, my fingers tracing the glossy images of a smiling little boy with my eyes and his father's wide, happy grin. A boy on his first bicycle, wobbling but determined. A boy proudly holding up a string of tiny fish from the local creek. A boy in his high school graduation cap, his arms slung around my shoulders, beaming with a future that seemed so bright. Where did he go? When did that happy, loving child, the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, turn into the cold, calculating monster who kept a poison journal in his garage? I searched his face in the old photographs, looking for a clue, a shadow, a hint of the darkness to come. But there was nothing. There was only my son. The boy I had loved with every fiber of my being. The man who had methodically plotted to kill me. And as I closed the heavy album, the tears finally came. Not tears of fear or anger, but tears of profound, inconsolable grief for the son I had already lost long before the police ever knocked on his door. The initial overwhelming wave of relief that came with Mark's arrest was a fragile thing. It quickly subsided, replaced by the grim, tedious reality of what was to come. The local news picked up the story, and this time they used our names. My quiet, private life was shattered. My private nightmare had become public spectacle. The lead story on the 6 o'clock news. I saw the news van parked down the street. I stopped answering my phone, which rang constantly with calls from reporters and morbidly curious acquaintances. About a week after the arrest, I received a call from the district attorney's office. They wanted to meet. I found myself back in that sterile conference room, sitting across from the sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor, Ms. Davies. Detective Evans sat beside me, a quiet, reassuring presence. Helen, Ms. Davies began, getting straight to the point. Mark has a lawyer. A very expensive one, it seems, paid for by his wife's family before they fully understood the situation. And they are aggressively pushing for a plea deal. My heart, which had just started to beat at a normal rhythm again, sank like a stone. What kind of deal? He's willing to plead guilty to a slate of lesser charges: aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, illegal possession of a controlled substance. His lawyer is crafting a narrative. He's going to claim he was deep in a mental health crisis, suffering from depression and anxiety due to his financial pressures. He'll say he was irresponsibly experimenting with herbal remedies for his own use, that he recklessly contaminated the wine by mistake. He will vehemently deny any intention of killing anyone. I stared at her, my mouth agape. A mistake? A mental health crisis? What about the notebook? The entries about me? The words, the big inheritance payout? His lawyer is going to argue that the notebook was a work of fiction, Ms. Davies said, her lips tightening in a grim line. A dark fantasy he was writing. A way to vent his frustrations with you over the financial disputes. They'll say the timing of the gift was a tragic, unfortunate coincidence. It's a weak, frankly disgusting argument, but in a courtroom, a clever lawyer can make a jury believe almost anything. So what does this deal mean for him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What would be the consequences? It means he would serve prison time, but significantly less. Instead of life, we'd be looking at maybe 5 to 7 years. With good behavior, he could be eligible for parole after 3. She leaned forward. It would also spare you the undeniable ordeal of a public trial. You wouldn't have to testify. You wouldn't have to endure a cross-examination where they will undoubtedly try to assassinate your character. Your family's private life wouldn't be dissected in open court. It would all be over relatively quickly. The room felt small, the air thick and hard to breathe. They were leaving the decision up to me, the victim. If I agreed, this nightmare would have a swift conclusion. I could go back to my quiet life. No testifying. No having my personal life and my relationship with my son dragged through the mud for public consumption. 3 years. He tries to murder me, slowly tortures his own father-in-law, and he could be a free man in 3 years. The thought was nauseating. It felt like a betrayal of David, of justice itself. I need to think about it, I said, standing up on shaky legs that barely felt like my own. That night my phone rang. It was David Miller. He was home from the hospital, his voice still weak but filled with a new hard-edged anger. Helen, Jessica just left my house, he said, his voice tight. She told me about the plea deal. She was crying, begging me to convince you to take it, to not ruin Mark's entire life over one terrible mistake. What did you say to her? I asked, my stomach twisting. I told my own daughter that she was a fool if she believed that, and a coward if she didn't. I told her that her husband isn't just a flawed man who made a mistake. He's a monster who used me as his personal lab rat. Then I told her not to come back to this house until she remembered the difference between right and wrong. There was a pained silence on the line. Helen, you can't take that deal. Please. This wasn't a mistake. If you let him out in 3 years, what do you think he's going to do? Do you think he'll have learned his lesson and found God? Or do you think he'll just have learned how to be better at it next time? How to not leave a notebook behind? His words hit me like a physical blow because they were the raw, unvarnished truth. My desire to avoid a painful trial, to retreat back into the quiet of my life, was a selfish one. It was about protecting myself from more pain. But this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about David. It was about ensuring the safety of whatever poor soul Mark might decide was in his way next. This was about consequences. The next morning I drove to the cemetery and sat by my husband's grave. The marble cool under my hand. Richard, I whispered to the empty air. What do I do? He's our son. Our little boy. But I knew what Richard would have said. He was a man of principle, a man who believed you reap what you sow. I thought about the humiliation of the APS visit. I thought about the terror I felt when I saw that car parked outside my house. I thought about David, pale and weak in that hospital bed. A victim of my son's casual cruelty. This wasn't just about sending my son to prison. It was about stopping a predator. My son, the predator. The choice, as hard as it was, became clear. It was the only choice. I drove from the cemetery straight to my lawyer's office, a kind, older man who had handled our will years ago. On his advice, I took a painful but necessary step. We immediately set up an irrevocable living trust, a legal fortress around my assets. The new trust designated my entire estate, the house, the savings, the investments, to be split between a local animal shelter and the pediatric wing of the county hospital. And in one stark, legally binding clause, it explicitly and permanently disinherited Mark Richards. It was a painful act, like severing a limb, but it removed the financial motive from the equation forever. Then, with a clear and resolute heart, I called Ms. Davies at the DA's office. I've made my decision, I said, my voice strong and unwavering. There will be no deal. I will testify. We are going to trial. I want you to charge him with everything you've got. The months leading up to the trial were a grueling marathon of legal maneuvers and emotional preparation. Mark's high-priced lawyer, a man named Arthur Thompson, was exactly the kind of slick, soulless operator you see in movies. He used every trick in the book to delay and obstruct. He filed motions to have the notebook thrown out as evidence, claiming it was inadmissible creative writing. He filed motions to suppress the damning search history from Mark's computer, arguing a violation of privacy. He even tried to question the legality of my secret recording, calling it an illegal wiretap. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Miller, no relation to David, thankfully, saw through most of his theatrics and denied the majority of his motions. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. I walked into the county courthouse, a building I had only ever been in for jury duty, and my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The room was cold and imposing, all dark wood and high ceilings that seemed to absorb all the sound and hope. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor, Ms. Davies. Detective Evans, who was the lead witness, gave me a reassuring nod from across the aisle. Then they brought him in. Mark was wearing a tailored gray suit and a crisp white shirt, his hair neatly combed. He looked like a respectable, young businessman wrongly accused, not a man on trial for the attempted murder of his own mother. It was a calculated performance for the jury. He scanned the room, his eyes briefly flicking over me with a look of cold indifference before settling on his lawyer. There was no remorse, no fear, just a chilling, arrogant confidence. Ms. Davies' opening statement was a masterpiece of controlled fury. She didn't raise her voice. She laid out the facts clearly and concisely, like a surgeon making precise incisions. She told the story of a son deep in debt, a mother with a valuable estate, and a birthday gift that was, in fact, a weapon. She spoke of the notebook, the search history, the burner phones, painting a portrait of calculated, cold-blooded greed. Then Mr. Thompson stood up. He was smooth, charming, and utterly reptilian. He glided in front of the jury box, his hands clasped behind his back. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice dripping with a false, syrupy sympathy. "What the prosecution calls a plot, we call a tragedy. A tragic misunderstanding. A story of a lonely, aging mother, estranged from her only son, who has allowed years of bitterness and paranoia to warp her perception of reality." My jaw tightened. He was using the very same tactic Mark had tried from the beginning. He was putting me on trial. "We will show you," he continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction without actually looking at me, "that Helen Richards has a history of being a controlling and difficult presence in her son's life, that she resented his success, his independence, and his marriage. We will show you that this entire case is built on a mountain of circumstantial evidence and the wild, unsubstantiated claims of a woman who is perhaps not as mentally sound as she appears, a woman desperate for attention." He was a viper and his words were venom. I could feel the eyes of the jurors on me, sizing me up, wondering. The first day of testimony was a barrage of technical witnesses. The stoic lab technician who confirmed, in dry scientific terms, the lethal concentration of digitalis in the wine. The grim-faced financial expert from the bank who detailed Mark's catastrophic debts, the high-interest loans, and the impending deadlines that would have led to financial ruin. Through it all, Mark sat impassively, occasionally whispering to his lawyer, the picture of detached innocence. The second day they called David Miller to the stand. His presence commanded a quiet respect. He walked slowly to the stand, leaning heavily on his cane, a visible, living reminder of what he had endured. He spoke clearly and simply about my visit, about receiving the wine, and about the terrifying hours that followed as his body betrayed him. On cross-examination, Mr. Thompson was brutal and condescending. "Mr. Miller, isn't it true that you are on several powerful medications for a pre-existing heart condition?" "Yes, I am," David said, his voice firm. "And isn't it entirely possible that you simply had a severe, adverse reaction to drinking alcohol while on these medications? A reaction you are now conveniently blaming on my client." David looked not at Thompson but directly at the jury. "I've been on these same medications for 10 years, he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "I have a small glass of wine with my dinner maybe once or twice a month. I've never collapsed before. Not until the night I drank the wine my son-in-law sent to his mother." You could feel the shift in the room. The jury liked David. They believed him. Mr. Thompson then moved on to me, even though I wasn't on the stand yet. He started questioning David about my relationship with Mark. He brought up the fight we'd had over selling the house. He twisted my concern for Richard's memory into a petty, selfish narrative of me being a controlling matriarch, actively trying to sabotage my son's legitimate business ambitions because I couldn't let go. He was painting a picture of me as a bitter, resentful woman who would do anything to get back at her son, including, he implied, fabricating this entire story. Every word was a lie, a grotesque distortion of the truth, but I could see some of the jurors looking at me with a new expression of uncertainty. The seeds of doubt were being sown. I felt a knot of pure dread tighten in my stomach. What if it worked? What if this slick, heartless lawyer managed to convince 12 strangers that I was the villain here? That evening I sat in my silent kitchen, unable to eat, the fluorescent light humming overhead. The weight of the trial was a physical thing, pressing down on my shoulders. They weren't just attacking the evidence. They were attacking my character, my motives, my entire life as a mother. It was a character assassination, played out for a room full of strangers. I thought about giving up, about telling Ms. Davies that I couldn't take any more, that I didn't have the strength to get on that stand and let them tear me to shreds. But then I thought of the cold, arrogant smirk on Mark's face, the venom in Jessica's voice, and the quiet, unwavering dignity of David on the witness stand. No, I had come this far. I had to see it through. No matter what they threw at me, no matter how much mud they slung, I would not break. I would get on that stand and I would speak the truth. The third day of the trial was the day I was scheduled to testify. I barely slept the night before, my mind a relentless battlefield where Mr. Thompson's venomous words clashed with my own fears. He was going to try to tear me apart on the stand, to twist my love into obsession and my concern into control. I had to be ready. When Ms. Davies called my name, a hush fell over the courtroom. I walked to the stand, my steps measured and deliberate. I refused to look at Mark as I passed the defendant's table. I would not give him that satisfaction. I took my seat, swore the oath with my hand on the Bible, and faced the jury. They were a sea of impassive faces, a dozen pairs of eyes trying to read me, trying to decide if I was a grieving mother betrayed, or a vindictive liar. Ms. Davies led me through my story gently, her questions clear and direct. She had me recount the quiet solitude of my birthday, the unexpected arrival of the package, my initial flicker of hope, and my ultimate decision to give the wine to David. When she asked me to describe the phone call with Mark the next day, my voice was steady, imbued with a clarity born of endless repetition in my mind. He didn't ask if I was okay, or if I liked the gift, I said, looking from one juror to the next, trying to make a connection. He only asked one thing, and his voice was so tight, so eager. He asked, "Did you try it yet?" When I told him I had given it to David, there was a dead silence. And then he screamed at me. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. Then she brought up the centerpiece of her case, the notebook. She had an enlarged, high-resolution photograph of the final page projected onto the large screen in the courtroom. The words, in my son's familiar messy script, were stark and chilling for everyone to see. HR final dose prepared. Batch number 7 maximum potency. For the big inheritance payout. No more half measures. A collective audible gasp went through the courtroom. I saw a juror in the front row, a woman about my age with kind eyes, press her hand to her mouth in horror. Another juror, a younger man, just shook his head slowly in disbelief. Ms. Davies let the image hang there for a long, pregnant moment before turning back to me. "Mrs. Richards, what do you believe the big inheritance payout refers to?" "My death," I said simply, my voice clear and without a tremor. He wanted my house. He wanted my savings, my husband's life insurance. He wanted it all. Then it was Mr. Thompson's turn. He approached the stand with the confident, predatory grace of a shark gliding through water. "Mrs. Richards," he began, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. "Let's talk about your rather strained relationship with your son. Isn't it true that just a few years ago, you refused to help him with the down payment for his first house, even though you were more than capable of doing so? My late husband and I had already paid for his entire 4 years of college, a considerable expense," I replied, keeping my voice even. "We felt it was important for him to learn to stand on his own 2 feet as an adult. So you cut him off financially. A classic tool of control. And isn't it also true that you frequently expressed disapproval of his wife, Jessica?" I expressed concern that they were living a lifestyle far beyond their means. I was worried they would find themselves in financial trouble. "So you admit to being critical, to meddling in his personal financial and marital life?" "I admit to being a mother who was concerned for her son's well-being." He paced back and forth in front of me, a picture of smug theatricality. "Concerned? Or controlling? You wanted him to live the life you had planned for him, not the one he wanted for himself. And when he wouldn't comply, when he asserted his independence, you grew bitter. Isn't that the real truth here, Mrs. Richards? The truth, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts to control it, is that my son researched poisons, brewed a tincture in his garage, and put it in a bottle of wine he sent me for my birthday, all for his inheritance. Objection! Thompson shouted, spinning around to face the judge. Speculation. The witness is not sticking to the facts. Sustained, the judge said, her voice tired. Mrs. Richards, please just answer the questions you are asked. Thompson smiled, a thin, triumphant reptilian smile. He had gotten the reaction he wanted. He had poked the bear and made me look emotional, unstable. He then brought up the APS visit, framing it not as Mark's cruel retaliation, but as independent proof from a concerned citizen that others were worried about my mental state. He twisted every fact, every memory, into a weapon to use against me. By the time he finally said, "No further questions," I felt emotionally bruised, scoured, and utterly exhausted. I walked back to my seat, my legs trembling. Had I done enough? Had the jury seen through his disgusting act? Or did they now believe I was the monster he had so skillfully painted me to be? The final witness for the prosecution was Detective Evans. He was the anchor in the storm, the calm voice of reason after Thompson's histrionics. Calmly and professionally, he detailed every piece of physical evidence. He presented the deleted emails from Mark's computer to Jessica's cousin at the botanical garden, where they discussed the hardiness and toxicity of various foxglove cultivars. He presented the financial records, showing a payment of $5,000 from Mark to the cousin just a week before my birthday, with the memo line reading garden consulting fee. But the final piece of evidence, the one that sealed the coffin, was the text messages from the burner phone. We recovered a series of text messages from a prepaid burner phone Mark Richards purchased with cash 2 months prior. Detective Evans explained, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. The messages were to another burner phone. We have not been able to identify the other party, but the content of the messages is clear. Ms. Davies projected the texts onto the screen. The courtroom was dead silent as the words appeared. Mark. Is the tincture ready? Needs to be strong. No mistakes this time. This is for the whole college fund. Unknown, ready. Batch number 7 is the most potent yet. Undetectable in a dark red wine. Completely clean. Mark good. The old woman won't know what hit her. She's been a roadblock long enough. The words college fund and the old woman hung in the air, a testament to his cold, transactional view of my life. Mr. Thompson objected furiously, claiming the text could have been faked, but the evidence of the phone purchase and the cell tower data placing it in Mark's possession was undeniable. It was all there in black and white. His greed, his calculation, his complete and utter lack of a soul. As Detective Evans stepped down from the stand, I risked a glance at the jury. The uncertainty was gone from their faces. In its place I saw dawning horror and cold, unified disgust. They finally saw him for what he really was. The closing arguments were a perfect encapsulation of the entire trial. A battle between slick, manipulative fiction and hard, ugly fact. Mr. Thompson was theatrical, his voice rising and falling with practiced emotion as he paced in front of the jury, waving his hands for emphasis. He painted a picture of a desperate young man. A loving father pushed to the edge by a domineering mother and crushing financial pressure. He claimed Mark had made foolish, regrettable choices, but that he was not a murderer. He called the notebook dark fantasy, a disturbed but harmless way for a frustrated son to vent. He dismissed the text as taken out of context, a conversation about a different, unrelated matter entirely. He tried one last time to portray me as the catalyst, the bitter, controlling mother whose constant rejection had pushed her son over the brink of reason. It was a compelling performance, but it felt hollow, a beautiful, elaborate structure built on a foundation of smoke and mirrors. Then Ms. Davies stood up. She didn't pace. She stood still, her hands resting calmly on the prosecution's table, and spoke in a clear, measured voice that commanded attention. Mr. Thompson would have you believe this is a complicated story of family dysfunction, of psychological turmoil. She began, making eye contact with each juror. It is not. It is a very simple story. It is a story about greed. It's about a man who looked at his own mother and saw not a person, not the woman who raised him, but a dollar sign. An obstacle. a roadblock in his own words standing between him and the life he felt he was entitled to. She walked the jury back through the evidence, not with emotion, but with the relentless logic of fact. The poison confirmed by the lab, the methodical research on his laptop, the chilling detailed entries in the notebook, the clear financial motive, the burner phones, the lies. This was not a mistake, she said, her voice ringing with a quiet but powerful conviction as she pointed a single, unwavering finger at Mark. This was a plan. A cold, calculated, and nearly successful plan to commit murder for financial gain. A plan so cold that he was willing to let his own father-in-law, a good and decent man, die as collateral damage. Don't be fooled by the expensive suit or the smooth words of his lawyer. Look at the evidence. The evidence doesn't have a motive to lie. The evidence tells you exactly who Mark Richards is. She returned to her seat. The courtroom was silent. The judge gave her final instructions to the jury, her voice a monotone drone, and then they filed out of the room to begin their deliberations. The waiting was the worst part of all. The courtroom emptied, leaving just me, a pale and trembling David, Detective Evans, and the legal teams. We sat in a heavy, anxious silence, the ticking of the large clock on the wall the only sound. Every tick felt like a hammer blow against my nerves. We went to the courthouse cafeteria, a place that smelled of stale coffee and desperation, but no one could eat. We just sat there stirring our drinks, lost in our own thoughts, and waited. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Mr. Thompson looked confident, chatting and laughing quietly with his assistant. Mark just stared at the wall, a single muscle twitching in his jaw. My own anxiety was a living thing, a wild bird thrashing inside my chest. What if they believed him? What if there was just one juror who bought into the story of the bitter, crazy mother? What if, after all this, he walked free? After 3.5 hours, just as I thought I might actually break from the tension, the bailiff came out. They have a verdict. My breath hitched in my throat. We filed back into the courtroom, our hearts pounding in a frantic, unified rhythm. The air was so thick with tension you could taste it. The jurors filed back in, their faces grim and unreadable. I followed the old trial watcher's wisdom and watched their eyes. None of them, not a single one, looked at the defense table. My heart gave a single powerful leap of hope. The foreman, a burly man with a thick mustache who worked in construction, handed a piece of paper to the bailiff. The bailiff gave it to the judge. The judge read it, her expression unchanging, and handed it back to the foreman. The ritual was almost unbearable. In the matter of the state versus Mark Richards on the charge of attempted murder, the judge's voice boomed in the silent room. How do you find? The foreman cleared his throat, his gaze fixed firmly on the judge. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Richards, guilty. A collective exhale, a sound of pure, pent-up emotion swept through the room. I felt the tension drain out of my body so fast I went weak with relief. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down my face. Beside me, David squeezed my hand, his own eyes wet. It was over. The truth had won. Mark didn't react at first. He just sat there frozen. Then, as the bailiff moved behind him to put him in handcuffs, something inside him seemed to snap. He stood up abruptly, knocking his expensive wooden chair over with a loud crash, and turned to face me. His face was no longer a mask of calm indifference. It was contorted with a pure, undiluted hatred that was terrifying to behold. You did this, he screamed, his voice raw and ugly, spittle flying from his lips. You ruined my life. You were always trying to control me, and now you've finally destroyed me. I hope you're happy, you miserable old witch. The bailiffs grabbed him, their hands firm on his arms, pulling him toward the side door. But he kept screaming, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. This isn't over. You hear me? This is not over. His final hateful words hung in the air long after he was gone, a final parting shot of venom. But they couldn't touch me. The verdict was a shield. The truth was my armor. He hadn't destroyed me. He had destroyed himself. And now the entire world knew what he was. The sentencing happened a month later. It was a formality, but one I felt I needed to attend. The judge, her face a stern mask, spoke directly to Mark. She talked about the sanctity of the relationship between a parent and child, and the profound, almost unimaginable depravity of his actions. She called his crime a cancer of greed and entitlement, that had poisoned his entire family. She gave him the maximum sentence allowed by Ohio law, life in prison, with the first possibility of parole after 25 years. 25 years. He would be in his 60s when, or if he ever got out. He didn't look at me once during the entire proceeding. He just stared at the judge with those same cold, dead eyes. Life after the trial was strange, and quiet in a way I hadn't experienced before. The constant hum of anxiety that had been my companion for months was gone, but the silence it left behind was deafening. The whispers in town eventually faded, replaced by an awkward, pitying sympathy from neighbors that was almost worse. They'd see me at the grocery store and give me a sad little smile, their eyes full of a morbid curiosity I couldn't stand. My private nightmare had become my public identity. I was the poor woman whose son tried to kill her. About 2 months after the sentencing, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. It was from a law firm. Inside was a short, typed letter from Jessica, and a stack of divorce filings. The letter wasn't an apology, not really. It was more of a clarification, a final desperate attempt to distance herself from the monster she had married. She wrote that she had filed for divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty. She said Mark had manipulated her for years, feeding her a steady diet of lies about me, painting me as a villain to isolate him and make her dependent on him. She wrote that she had been a fool to believe him, blinded by what she had thought was love. She was taking their 2 young children and moving back to her home state to be near her family, to try and start over. She ended the letter with a single stark sentence. I am sorry for what my husband did, and I am sorry I was not strong enough to see it sooner. I folded the letter and put it away. I never heard from her again. I couldn't find it in my heart to hate her, only to pity her for the years she had wasted and the terrible truth she now had to explain to her children someday. David and I, however, became closer than ever. We were survivors, 2 people bound by a shared trauma that no one else could ever truly understand. We'd have dinner together a few times a week, sometimes at my house, sometimes at his. We talked about everything except Mark. His name became a forbidden word, a ghost we mutually, silently agreed to refuse to acknowledge. We talked about our late spouses, about our gardens, about the ridiculousness of the new city council, about the birds at the feeder. We found a quiet, comfortable, healing friendship in the wreckage, a small sturdy plant growing in scorched earth. One crisp autumn afternoon, Detective Evans stopped by. He was off duty on his way home from a fishing trip, and he had a cooler in the back of his truck. He accepted a glass of iced tea and sat with me on the porch swing, the late sun glinting off his sunglasses. Thought you should know, he said, looking out at my yard where the leaves were beginning to turn. We finally got a confession out of the other party on the burner phone. The cousin, Leo. I held my breath, waiting. Turns out, Mark's story about the inheritance was even more of a lie than we thought. He had promised the cousin a huge percentage of my estate. A finder's fee, he called it, for supplying the raw materials and the chemical expertise. The cousin, it turns out, has a chemistry degree he'd never used. He thought he was a genius, and Mark played right into his ego. He's been arrested and will be tried as an accomplice. He gave up everything. So it was all about the inheritance, a web of greed that had ensnared not just my son, but others as well, preying on their own avarice. It was a sordid, pathetic end to a sordid, pathetic plan. I'm glad you got him, I said quietly. Thank you, detective, for everything. For believing me when it would have been easier not to. He just nodded, taking a long sip of his tea. Just doing my job, Helen. You were the one who was brave. You're the one who had to stand up there and face him. After he left, I continued to sit on the swing, its chains making a soft, rhythmic creak. The trial was over. The accomplices were caught. The legal battles were done. But the emotional fallout remained, a toxic residue that I knew would take a long time to clean up. There were nights I'd wake up from a nightmare, my heart pounding, the memory of Mark's face, contorted with rage in the courtroom, fresh and vivid in my mind. There were days I'd see a young boy with his mother at the grocery store and feel a pang of grief so sharp it literally took my breath away. The house itself felt tainted. I found myself looking at the spot on the counter where the poisoned wine bottle had sat, at the chair where the APS worker had interviewed me, and feeling a cold dread creep up my spine. The memories were baked into the walls. This wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a crime scene. One day, while I was deadheading my roses, David came over and leaned on the fence between our yards. "You know, Helen," he said gently, watching my hands, "a house is just wood and nails. A home is where you feel safe, where you can breathe. Maybe it's time to find a new place to breathe." His words struck a chord deep inside me. He was right. I couldn't erase the past, but I didn't have to live inside its four walls every single day. The decision once made felt liberating. I wasn't running away from the memories. I was moving toward a future. Selling the house I had shared with Richard for over 40 years, the house where I had raised my son, was harder than I expected. Every packed box held a ghost of a memory, a lifetime of laughter, scraped knees, holiday dinners, and quiet moments. But as the moving truck pulled away from the curb for the last time, and I looked back at the empty windows, I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I was leaving the ghost of who I used to be, and the monster my son had become, behind in those rooms. I bought a small sunny condominium in a lovely, well-kept community just a few miles away. It was closer to town, and as it happened, just a 5-minute drive from where David was now living. It was new, clean, and held no memories but the ones I was choosing to make day by day. I painted the walls a cheerful buttery yellow. I planted a container garden on my new balcony with tomatoes and herbs. I started building a new life, one nail, one brushstroke, one quiet, peaceful morning at a time. The scars, of course, are still there. They're not the kind that ever truly fade. There's a part of a mother's heart that will always belong to her child, even a child who has committed an act so monstrous it defies understanding. I don't think about Mark often, but when I do, it's with a profound, aching sadness for the little boy who got lost somewhere along the way to manhood. I have stopped trying to understand what twisted him into that man. Some darkness is just unknowable, and trying to comprehend it is a form of madness itself. What I focus on now instead is the strength I never knew I possessed. The woman who was intimidated by her son's anger and manipulation is gone. The woman who was humiliated and almost broken by a visit from Adult Protective Services is gone. In their place is a woman who looked pure evil in the face and refused to blink. A woman who found her voice and fought for the truth, not just for herself, but for her friend. A woman who survived. My life is quiet now, but it's a good, healing quiet. It's filled with simple pleasures. Dinners with David, volunteering at the local library where the smell of books is a comfort, and long walks in the park. I've learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. It's about the people who show up for you when the world is falling apart, the people who believe you without question, who sit with you in the dark and patiently wait for the sun to rise again. I'm telling you my story today not because I want your pity, but because I want you to know with every fiber of my being that you are not alone. Betrayal, especially from those we are supposed to trust the most, a child, a spouse, a sibling, leaves a wound deeper and more poisonous than any other. It can make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and even your own worth. But it does not have to be the end of your story. That cold, hard anger that I felt in the beginning, the anger that I was almost ashamed of, it became my fuel. It transformed from a destructive fire that threatened to consume me into a forge, shaping me into someone stronger, someone who would no longer be silent, who would no longer be made to feel small or question her own mind. You have that strength inside you too. Don't ever let anyone take it from you. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you or someone you know has ever had to face a painful betrayal from within your own family, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes just knowing you're not the only one fighting this battle is the first step toward healing. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of survival and strength. Remember, you are not alone.